This is Terry Wagar. The date today is August 26, 2015. I am a victim of a murder conspiracy. All my life I have been targeted on and off by Multnomah County Sheriff and by Portland Police sting operations. In 1971, when I was 6 years old, the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham, some of their relatives, the Dunham family, were framing a neighbor of ours that lived a block away from where we lived. They were framing this person as a pedophile, and they were using a Multnomah County Sheriff officer as a double to impersonate the person they were framing. And it was the Dunham family that brought their children, as well as neighbor children, that they rounded up from the neighborhood to this location to pose for photogenic photos with this county sheriff officer that was acting as a double. The Dunham family, I happen to be one of the neighbor children the Dunham family rounded up for this. Ever since the Dunham family and the Multnomah County Sheriff used me in this sting operation to frame this neighbor, and I was only 6 years old at the time and didn't know what the hell was going on. The Dunham family and the Multnomah County Sheriffs, from that point forward, were targeting me and were targeting every member of my side of the family in a sting operation. And the Dunham family, the Multnomah County Sheriffs, literally 10 days after they framed this neighbor, was making threats and coercing my mother into silence, because they used me in this operation. Now, ever since that county sheriff officers threatened my mother to get my mother to remain silent as to what the Dunhams and the county sheriffs did to this neighbor, from this point forward, the Dunham family was befriending my mother in order to gain her confidence and her trust, so that the Dunham family and the Multnomah County sheriffs can have continued and further access to me. For the next year, the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family were setting my mother up as a pedophile, and they were using me in this operation. And it was the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family that were, on a bi-weekly basis, were taking me to the movie theaters, and they were deliberately making me sit alone in the movie theaters while very inappropriate movies were playing in the movie theater. And it was Multnomah County Sheriffs that were taking the photogenic photos of me while I sit alone in that movie theater. And it was the Dunham family that was putting me in this situation in the first place. So they're very much using sting operation tactics. They're not hiding it from me because they know I'm only 6 years old and don't understand what's going on. They weren't hiding any of it from me. When I got old enough to have the presence of mind to start complaining, that's when the sting operation switched gears, and they stopped focusing on me and my mother, and they focused instead on my brother, my older brother, and my father. So they switched gears, they switched priorities the moment I started complaining. These are all classic signs of a sting. They weren't hiding any of this from me or any member of my family. They were heavily targeting every member of my family. And anytime any member of my family, including me, anytime we complained about anything that the county sheriffs or the Dunhams were doing, they would switch gears and focus on another member of my family. By 1972, the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family were planning stolen property on our property, and were auto-blaming my brother for it. And around the same time they were doing this, the Dunham family set a garage on fire that was right behind our house, right behind our property. It's on somebody else's property, and that garage was quite literally sandwiched in between our property and the Dunham family's property, because the Dunham family were literally neighbors that lived 2 houses away from where we lived. And they set this garage on fire. Well, the Dunham family, they're the ones responsible for the fire, but they talked my father into helping them tear down this garage because it was a safety hazard. So they enlisted my father's help in tearing down his garage. Well, what was the Dunham family doing while my father's trying to help these people? The mother of the Dunham family was repeatedly snapping photogenic photos of my father while he's tearing down his garage. So this is how the sting ops were setting up my father. Literally. This is how they were setting up my father. Sting ops are very big on their fucking photogenic photos. They're very big at acting friendly and in order to ingratiate themselves to their targets so that they can embed themselves into the lives of their targets so that they can affect change in a negative way upon their target. The Dunham family literally befriended my mother so that they could have further access to me. And what were they doing with me when I was only 6 years old? They're taking me to the movie theaters. They're making me sit alone in this movie theater, and plainclothes Multnomah County Sheriff officers were snapping photogenic photos of me repeatedly while I sit alone in this theater. And the Dunham family were making me sit and watch very inappropriate movies that are not appropriate for kids at all. And it was county sheriffs that doing all the fucking photogenic photo taking for that. Now, when the Dunham family set that garage on fire and they enlisted my father's help in getting that garage torn down, the Dunham family were taking photogenic photos of my father tearing the garage down. So now I've given you enough information to know how important and what a huge tactic it is for sting ops when they target people. They befriend their targets so that they can get their targets into incriminating situations. The sting ops commit the crime so that they can make the targets look like the bad guys. And then the sting ops will stage disasters and then recruit the targets in helping them fix the disaster so that the sting ops can take photogenic photos of the target solving a problem so that they can blame the target for it. So they were building up to all of this shit. They literally focused most all of 1971 and early part of 1972 targeting me and my mother. And then the remainder of 1972 and the whole first half of 1973, they were most exclusively just targeting my older brother and my father. By mid-1973, that's when the Dunham family and the Multnomah County Sheriffs found out that I still remembered what happened in 1971. That's when me and my brother and my father became heavily gang-stalked. Me and my brother, even though we're in two separate schools, me and my brother at the same time were getting beaten up on, ganged up on at our two separate schools. And both at the same time, me and my brother were kicked out of school. In other words, me and my brother were getting blamed for the fights that the sting ops brats that were picking fights with us. We were the ones getting the blame for what the sting ops brats were doing. And at the same time, me and my brother were getting beaten up at our schools and being kicked out of our schools by this sting operation. My father was being gang-stalked by the sting operation at his very own place of employment where he worked. And those sting ops sabotaged his career. Right after the sting operation had me and my brother beaten at our schools and had me and my brother kicked out of our schools, that's when the Multnomah County Sheriff's ordered the school system to use this pretense as an excuse to make the requirement of, well, gee, they can't go back to school unless they're put on these medications. And my father and my mother had no idea what these medications were. Me and my brother didn't know what these medications were. Now keep in mind, this is right after the Dunham family and county sheriffs found out that I still remembered what they did back in 1971. So they put us on, the school said, we can't go back to school unless we're put on these meds. So my mother, not knowing what the hell this shit is, my father not knowing what this shit is, they just blindly trusted their government and assumed, well, it must be something that's good for them, you know. So they put us on these meds, not really knowing what the fuck the shit was. The goddamn shit was speed. That's what the shit was. And it was the fucking schools that were prescribing it and mandating it. And they did this right after the Dunham family and the Multnomah County Sheriffs found out. I still remembered what they did in 1971. Now, ever since this incident, that's when the poisonings began. That's when my brother started getting poisoned. That's when my father started getting poisoned. I may have been poisoned as well. I don't know. So it was during this phase when we were being poisoned. Anytime my father went to emergency hospital, they did nothing to help him, and they covered up the poisoning by just refusing to recognize the symptoms of it. They did the same thing to my brother. My brother described the poisoning symptoms he was suffering from, but he didn't realize he was being poisoned. I didn't realize that he was being poisoned, and I didn't realize I was being poisoned either. Me and my brother were just kids. We don't even know what the hell, what is poisoning, what is poisoning symptoms. We didn't even know. We were being poisoned and we didn't know about it. My father was being poisoned, and when my father went to the emergency hospital, the hospital did nothing to help him. By 1974, my father was jobless, severely debilitated from being poisoned. My brother was no longer in school. He couldn't go back to school. He was so heavily gang-stalked. They couldn't even go to school without being beaten. He was literally out of school at this point, and my brother couldn't even leave our home without being gang-stalked and falsely accused of crimes by organized stalkers that stalk him. And by this time, I'm scared at this point. I'm just a kid. I'm like 8, 9 years old at this time, and I'm scared. I know damn well shit's going on. I know damn well we were being ganged up on. I didn't know or understand why. All I know is we were being ganged up on by grinning, smirking, organized fucking people that are not really trying to hide it because they don't really give a damn. By 1974, the Multnomah County Sheriff's and the Portland Police Department literally had my brother committed to cover up the fact that he was being poisoned. They already had my father poisoned and debilitated and jobless. And I'm only 9 years old at this time, scared to death, afraid I'm going to end up the same way as my brother and my father. 2 weeks after the Multnomah County Sheriff's and the Portland Police Department had my brother committed, and he's only a kid, no trials, no testimony, no nothing, just fascist Multnomah County Sheriffs and fascist Portland police officers flexing their fascist muscle to get rid of people without any trials or due process or testimony or any kind of due process, anything. 2 weeks after my brother was taken away and committed by the Portland Police and Multnomah County Sheriffs, and my father is in a debilitated condition, and he's afraid to leave the home, it's at this point when the Dunham family and the Multnomah County Sheriff set me up to be shot. And they were shooting at me. It was Kurt Dunham that was acting as a phony friend to get me into this situation. He wanted me to go to Selwood Park with him, specifically, at night, just as the sun's going down, right after dusk, literally right after dusk. And as soon as we get into Selwood Park, oh gee, 2 dudes in camos that have camo jackets and camo uniforms and have camo war paint on, which were packing rifles, and they had handguns in holsters, and they had what looked like military-grade knives that were on their utility belt. And they were quite literally hiding and lurking behind the trees in Selwood Park, and they were fucking shooting at me with these rifles. Now, these rifles were pellet rifles. And Kurt Dunham was the person that got me into this situation. He was grinning from fucking ear to ear. While these dudes in camos were shooting at me, I'm only 9 years old. Kurt Dunham is 8 years old, and he's grinning like a fucking Cheshire cat while these people are shooting at me. And he's saying to me, go get them! Go after them! Go get them! And he's fucking grinning while he's saying this. So the Dunhams and the Multnomah County Sheriffs were setting me up when I'm only at the age of 9 years old, to be outright murdered by them. And because I'm only 9 fucking years old, I don't even fucking know what the hell's going on or why. I didn't even know what the fuck is a sting operation. I don't even know. I didn't recognize it as a sting operation. I knew nothing about sting operations. I knew nothing about law enforcement or their organized pedophile relatives that enjoy framing people and they enjoy victimizing people that are witnesses against them. I knew nothing about organized law enforcement and their fucking sick-ass relatives. This was sport to the Multnomah County Sheriffs and to the Dunham family, and they treated it like a sport the entire time. And at no time was there anybody that me or anybody in my family could turn to for help. They effectively destroyed me and my family in 1974, utterly and totally. And it wasn't until mid-1975 when I was old enough and mature enough to realize that in 1971, the Multnomah County Sheriffs and that Dunham family framed that neighbor that lived a block away as a pedo using doubles and photogenic photos, and that they were using the Dunham's brats as well as neighbor children that they rounded up to pose with that double so that they could frame that neighbor. That's when I made the realization that they did that. And how did I make that realization? Well, I saw the Multnomah County Sheriff Officer in his uniform. But because I'm 6 years old and didn't know anything about a Multnomah County Sheriff Officer, I didn't know what the uniform represented. I saw, in 1971, I saw the camera, Darlene Dunham, the mother of the Dunham family. I saw the camera Darlene Dunham was using, and it had a very big, round, yellow Multnomah County Sheriff seal on that camera. Darlene Dunham is not in the Multnomah County Sheriffs at all. Now here's the double in a Multnomah County Sheriff Officer uniform acting as a double impersonating the person that lived at that house. And here's Darlene Dunham bringing her children as well as neighbor children she rounded up to this double to pose for photogenic photos. And it was Darlene Dunham that took the photogenic photos. And she's using a camera that belongs to the Multnomah County Sheriffs. Now, because I was only 6 years old at the time, I didn't know what the uniform that county sheriff officer was wearing represented. And I didn't know what that seal that was on that camera represented. But I never forgot what the uniform looked like. And I never forgot what the seal on that camera looked like. When I got old enough to take interest in observing the local news on television, which was around the age of 10, that's when I found out what a Multnomah County Sheriff Officer was. And that's when I made the realization, Jesus Christ, that dude that was in that house in 1971 that the Dunhams brought me to, that dude was a fucking Multnomah County Sheriff Officer. Now, I still didn't quite figure out everything yet, but I made the realization at the age of 10 that that person was that the Dunhams brought me to was a Multnomah County Sheriff Officer. It was about 6 months later, which I'm literally about 10 and a half years old at this point. That's when I saw the Multnomah County Sheriff's seal on television. That's when I made the realization. I'm like, oh my God, that's the same symbol, the same seal that was on that camera Darlene Dunham was using back in 1971 when she brought me to that fucking Multnomah County Sheriff Officer. And that's when it clicked. That's when everything clicked. That's the moment everything clicked. I'm like, that's when it dawned on me, oh my God, they framed that neighbor that lived there as a pedo using doubles and photogenic photos. And they weren't even fucking trying to hide it from me. And they used me in this operation knowing I'm only 6 years old and don't understand what the fuck's going on. And when I made that realization, that's when I realized, gee, this is the reason why the Dunham families heavily befriended my mother shortly after this, so that they could have further access to me. And this is why they were taking me to these inappropriate movies. And this is why these weird dudes were constantly snapping photogenic photos of me while I was in the theater, sitting all by myself. And then it dawned on me, okay, now this is the reason why they were planning stolen property on our property. And this is the reason why they set that garage on fire, and that they recruited my father to help them tear that garage down so they could snap photogenic photos of him tearing that garage down. And then it dawned on me, right after that, oh my God, right after the Dunhams found out in 1973 that I still remembered what happened in 1971. That's when me and my brother was being ganged up on at our schools and being beaten for no apparent fucking reason by organized other students in these schools. And the schools were not blaming them. They were blaming me and my brother. And they kicked me and my brother out of school at the same time. And that's when the poisonings began. As soon as the Dunhams found out, I still remember what happened in 71. That's when the Dunhams told the county sheriffs, and then the county sheriffs used their fascist police powers and their influence with the schools to have me and my brother beaten and kicked out of our schools. And then they ordered us to be put on speed because they wanted to cause brain damage and memory loss on me and my brother. And this is the actual reason why, from that point forward, this is the reason why me and my brother and my father were being heavily gang-stalked by sting ops. The sting ops literally embedded themselves after they found out. I still remember what happened in 71. That's when the sting ops embedded themselves at my father's place of employment so that they could sabotage his career, and they did. So while my father's busy trying to be a good father and make a living and pay to support the family, my entire family was being beset by covert sting operatives, and it was the Dunhams that were the main cause of it, as well as the Multnomah County fucking sheriffs. By 1974, my father was so severely disabled and debilitated from being poisoned and so heavily gang-stalked himself, he was afraid to leave the home, and he was jobless. My brother was completely kicked out of school, couldn't go back to school, and he couldn't leave the home himself without being ganged up on and beaten, or being stalked by organized people that were blaming him for made-up shit that didn't happen or occur. And then the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Portland Police Department had my brother committed to cover up the fact they were poisoning him. And then while I'm at the fragile age of 9 years old, I'm in shock over all of this. I'm scared. I'm in shock. I know we're all being ganged up on. And it's 2 fucking weeks after my brother was committed by the Multnomah County Sheriffs and by the Portland Police Department. The Dunham family arranged to get me at Selwood Park just as it turns nighttime. And then I'm immediately being shot at by 2 dudes in camos. And at no time were they shooting at Kurt Dunham. They were shooting solely at me. And Kurt Dunham was all fucking grins during the whole process and was saying to me, while grinning, "Go after them! Go get them!" I didn't realize that we were victims of organized people in law enforcement and by their civilian relatives and their civilian buddies and their civilian girlfriends until I reached the age of 10 and a half, which was mid-1975. I became old enough and mature enough to be able to comprehend all the things that I witnessed over the years and made the realization. I was so scared At that point, I was afraid to say anything to anybody. I didn't know who was involved in it. I didn't know who wasn't involved in it. And I was afraid to say anything. I was afraid if I tried to warn anybody about this, that I would end up like my brother. My brother disappeared, taken from our home. No trials, no testimony, no nothing. Nothing. I was afraid what happened to my brother was going to happen to me. I spent the majority of my teenage, from the age of 10 until I basically turned an adult, I spent the vast majority of my time in my room, never wanting to really leave my room. When the Dunhams continued their pretended act of pretending to be friends with us, I just played along and said nothing because I was scared. Because I realized at the age of 10 and a half that these are the people that are responsible for what destroyed me, literally me and my entire family. They quite literally framed a neighbor of theirs that lived a block away from them, and they lived a block away from me and my family as well, and the Dunhams and the county sheriff used me in that operation, and then they immediately targeted and besetted upon me and my family ever since. By 1974, they utterly destroyed me and my entire family. And when the Dunhams, after this, continued their bullshit act of pretending to be friendly neighbors, I just played along and was scared to say a fucking thing. Because I'm aware of the power that they have and aware of the fact that if anybody's a witness against county sheriff officers or their civilian operatives, look what happens to witnesses against such people. I tried to go forward with my life as best as I could. Me and my entire family never recovered from this. We couldn't recover from this. We were quite literally in poverty from that point forward, ever since my father lost his job. He was too disabled to get a job, and he couldn't get recognized as properly disabled because the government just covered up the fact that he was poisoned and refused to recognize poisonings. When I turned 18, I got a job and was trying to help out with the bills. All I could get was a minimum wage job. I got a seasonal job, and I was trying to help my family pay the bills as best as I could. I was quite literally surrendering half my entire paycheck to them. I'm not in my own apartment or anything. I still stayed with my family, because I wanted to help and contribute to the bills and whatnot, because they were just barely struggling and barely surviving, barely getting by, and I wanted to help as best as I could. And over the years, I tried to recover from this disaster that affected and utterly destroyed my entire family. And I tried to make a life for myself. I tried to be a good person. I have a history as an adult of saving lives. I'm a very safety-conscious person. I got a job at Oaks Amusement Park. I worked there for a substantial length of time. Oaks Park deemed me to be one of their most valuable employees right off the bat, because I was a very safety-conscious person and cared about other people's safety. I grew up basically being a caring person because I had to help and care for my own family, because we were utterly destroyed by the sting operation that destroyed me and my family back when I was just a little kid. And so I had to spend the rest of my life helping my family as best as I could. And so I grew up basically being a caring person. And I cared, when I got the job at Oaks Park, I cared about other people's safety. And anytime there was a disaster down there at Oaks Park, I would immediately leap into the situation and to help as best as I can with any problems. I was immediately deemed a highly valuable employee by managers and by supervisors that worked at Oaks Park because they recognized me as a go-to type of a person, that if there's an emergency, I was the type of person that could handle it. And the vast majority of people that work at Oaks Park tend to be just people that are seasonal and just work minimum wage, and they're basically just there to put their time in and collect a paycheck, and really don't give a rat's ass about safety, and really don't know what to do in emergencies. I've always had the common sense to know what to do in an emergency, and it's not like I had special training to deal with emergencies or anything, because I didn't. But if anytime there was an emergency, I always knew what to do. It's just common sense for the most part. You'd be surprised how many people don't exercise common sense in an emergency situation. You'd be surprised. But I was immediately recognized and deemed one of the most valuable employees of that park because of my contributions to the safety standards and the safety policies of that park, and of the fact that I was saving lives in that park. I was saving lives my very first season in that park. I tried to make a life for myself. I didn't even start dating anybody really until like 1984. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was still being targeted by sting ops that were connected to the Dunham family. I didn't realize it. In 1984, there were some females that were pursuing me as a love interest. In 1984, when I worked at Oaks Park, one of those females was Joan Miner. Joan Miner was connected to the Dunham family, and she was trying to hide this fact from me. She never really amounted much of a love interest to me in '84, but she was trying to become a love interest of mine in 1984. But I was more interested in somebody else at the time. Not to mention that I'm still living with my parents and my family, and I'm still trying to help them. So I didn't really have much money to go spend on dating or whining and dining other people or anything like that. I didn't even have a vehicle. I had a motorcycle, but I didn't have a car. And the only reason I used a motorcycle was so it was easier to go back and forth to work from, because that was all I could really afford. And I was but I continued to work at Oaks Park. In 1986 or 1987, Joe Miner came back down there to Oaks Park and once again tried to pursue me as a love interest. This time I stupidly fell for it. Me and Joan Miner were dating for a while, and at some point, Joan Miner told me that she was pregnant, and she wanted me to believe that it was mine, and I wasn't sure if it was mine or not. I suspected it wasn't, and the reason I suspected was because I found some dude's wallet in Joan Miner's bedroom, and it had the dude's identification in there. And this was when me and Joan Miner were first dating. So I wasn't sure if the kid, if she was pregnant with my kid or with somebody else's, but she claimed it was mine. But I didn't necessarily blindly trust or believe her. But operating under the pretense that it might be mine, I was trying to do the right thing. And I still don't realize yet that she's connected to the Dunham family. I still didn't realize that yet. After Joan Miner's child was born, me and Joan Miner agreed to get married. So me and Joan got married, and my wife Joan Miner got my last name, so she was from that point forward known as Joan Wagar. And it was shortly after we got married, I would say about a year after we got married, that I found out that Joan Wagar is connected to Kurt Dunham. I found out that Joan Wagar's very first boyfriend was Kurt Dunham's best friend. And when I questioned my wife Joan Wagar as to whether she knew Kurt Dunham, my wife seemed very reluctant and was very unhappy with this line of questioning. And I was very much under the impression that she did not want to tell me what she knows about Kurt Dunham. She outright lied to me and said she doesn't know him. I knew that was a lie. The reason I knew that was a lie was because I seen Kurt Dunham and Joan Miner at this dude's house in the early 80s. Both Kurt Dunham and Joan Miner was at Kurt Dunham's best friend's house in the early 80s, and I just happened to be there at that time. And so I know Kurt Dunham is best friends with this dude, and I know Joan Miner was the girlfriend to this dude. And they were at this house at the same time. So I know damn well they know one another. I just didn't realize at the time, I didn't know this dude very well at all, and I didn't know who his girlfriend was. I spoke with this dude once, and I seen his girlfriend bursting out of that house yelling and screaming and cussing and take off down the sidewalk. I didn't get a very good look at her, but that dude was referring to her as his girlfriend and was referring to her as just some piece of ass he uses to relieve himself with. And he was mentioning this to Kurt Dunham and to me. This was in the early 80s. Now, I didn't realize at the time that that was my future bride. I didn't realize at the time that was my future wife. I did not realize it. Now, this was like 1981, 1982 when this occurred. Well, it was in 1984 when Joan Miner was trying to pursue me as a love interest. Now, after me and Joan Miner got married, and Joan Miner inherited my last name through our marriage. That's about a year later when I found out that, oh gee, she is the one that was girlfriends to this dude that was best friends with Kurt Dunham. And when I questioned my wife Joan about this, she was not very happy and didn't want to answer my questions, and she outright lied. And I said to her, you know what, I've seen you before. I've seen you at that house. I've seen you burst out of that house yelling and screaming and cussing, and you and some other female came out of that house and you were taking off down the sidewalk. Do you remember that? And my wife seemed a little bothered that I remembered that, and she said, I remember that, but she didn't seem happy that I'm making this connection. And then I said to her, why were you yelling and screaming when you burst out of that house? And then she looked very upset, and she looked very unhappy with that question. And she was basically implying that she doesn't remember. But she was doing this in a very cautious way. In other words, she's worried now at this point. She's actually acting like she's worried, how do I explain it? In other words, she wasn't being believable. She wasn't believable to me at all when she said she doesn't remember. She remembered bursting out of her first boyfriend's house, yelling and screaming and cussing at him while she's in the company of some other female. She remembers that, but then she claims she can't remember what the yelling and the cussing and screaming was over. That's just bullshit. If she could remember the yelling and screaming and cussing she did, then she could remember what it was about. So I knew she was lying. Well, me and my wife continued on with our life, and by the year 2000 came along, we had 3 children. All 3 were girls. We were raising 3 daughters. And my wife, Joan Wager, got a job at the Multnomah County Jail Kitchen as a prep cook. The moment my wife got this job at the Multnomah County Jail Kitchen as a prep cook is the moment my wife started showing signs of an affair. And my wife was also showing signs of lying to me, where I was catching her in lies. And my wife is no longer confiding in me in things, and she was being secretive and no longer telling me about the things she does during the day or throughout the day, or what she does when she goes hang out with her side of the family. She's no longer confiding in me in anything. She's being very secretive, and I was catching her in lies, and the signs of her having an affair were there. And it was very obvious and apparent that she no longer loved me. Because of this change in her behavior, and my wife's entire side of the family were also behaving as though they no longer liked me, they no longer cared about me, and for all intents and purposes were openly hostile towards me, but wouldn't verbally admit to it. So my guard is up. I'm under the belief, okay, my wife's cheating, possibly more than likely with somebody in law enforcement, and this divorce is imminent. I'm catching her in lies. I'm no longer confiding in her because of it, and my guard is up. Now, after my wife worked at the Multnomah County Jail Kitchen for just a mere month and a half, a single month and a half, the Multnomah County Sheriff told my wife, Joan Wager, to quit her job, to hide and conceal her connections to the Multnomah County Sheriff. And on the same day they told my wife to quit, the Multnomah County Sheriffs filled out a multitude of 72-hour notices to take over the surrounding apartments, surrounding my apartment and my father's apartment and my mother's home. Now, the day my wife was told to quit by the Multnomah County Sheriffs, to hide her connections with them, is the day the Multnomah County Sheriffs and their civilian sting ops are once again launching their sting operation, once again targeting me and my father and my mother. And this time, they're targeting all of my kids. And this time, they have my wife, Joan Wager, and every member of my wife's side of the family on board with it. Now, while my wife worked at the Multnomah County Jail Kitchen as a prep cook, they were in the planning stages of this sting operation. On the day the Multnomah County Sheriff told my wife to quit, to hide her connections with them, is the day they're launching the sting operation. Now, I uncovered this the day they launched it. Because the day my wife, Joan Wager, quit is the day, my wife and every member of her side of the family were celebrating the Multnomah County Sheriff's decision to frame and target me and every member of my family. They were celebrating it that day, that evening, literally. All of them, together as a group, were celebrating it. And they did this right in front of my face. They all showed up, everybody on my wife's side of the family showed up on my property. And they were all openly celebrating something. They weren't voluntarily telling me what they're celebrating, but they were very openly and blatantly celebrating something. It was so blatant and obvious that they obviously were hostile towards me in the sense that they're not bothering to explain to me what's going on. But they're blatantly and openly celebrating something. And they didn't give a shit if I fucking knew that. Now, I outright asked them. I said, gee, what are you guys all celebrating? Now, keep in mind, they're all on my property. They're out in my yard in front of my property. And they're all openly celebrating something, and they're being rude as fucking hell by not telling me what the fuck's going on. Now, when I asked that question, my wife, Joan Wager, and every member of her side of the family spent a minimum of the next 45 minutes doing nothing but non-stop hinting at everything. And the entire time they're doing this hinting, they're grinning and smirking and continuing to celebrate. Now, with they're all the hints that they were giving, their initial hints were blatant hints, and their blatant hints essentially hinted at big shit's going on. This big shit's going to be fucking me over, and that's what they're celebrating. That's what they were blatantly, intentionally hinting at. And they were having fun during their celebration at making these hints known to me. Now, because there's multiple people, my wife and every member of her side of the family, were doing this open celebration on my property. They weren't keeping track of the hints they were giving. And they were quite literally non-stop hinting. They were under the impression that every time they threw out a hint, that hint was going whoop right over my head. Literally. They were so happy that their bros, their buddies in the Multnomah County Sheriff decided they're going to get rid of me by targeting me and setting me up in a sting operation. They were so fucking happy and pleased over it, they didn't give a damn if I knew or suspected anything. Now, they weren't keeping track of the hints they were giving, and many times some of those members of Joni's side of the family would make hints that other members of the family were unaware of. For example, my wife would go into the apartment to pour herself a cup of coffee, and while she's doing that, my wife's sister, Vicki Rosales, and her son, Jesse Rosales, they were having fun giving me hints, implying that they're going to be setting me up as a pedo, and they were hinting at it. And then when my wife came out, after she has her cup of coffee in hand, she's completely oblivious that her sister and her sister's son already hinted to this effect. And then my wife's sister, Vicki Rosales, would go into the house to use the restroom. And while Vicki Rosales was in our apartment using the restroom, my wife, Joan Wager, herself was hinting at me that they're going to be setting me up as a pedo. So they're all having fun hinting, and they're completely oblivious to everybody else's hints. Suffice it to say, they weren't keeping track of the hints. They nonstop hinted at me. They gave me a shit ton more information than what they actually intended on me having. The only thing they wanted me to get from all the hinting was, big shit's going on, and that it's going to fuck me over, and that's what they're celebrating. That's all they intentionally wanted me to get from the hinting. But because their hints were nonstop, and because they weren't keeping track of the hints they gave, they ended up giving me a lot more hints than they intended on giving me. Now, after minimum 45 minutes of this shit, my wife's mother, Donna Miner, who's standing out there in my yard amongst this clusterfuck of people on my wife's side of the family that are openly celebrating shit that they don't want to openly talk about, she was under the impression that I stepped into the apartment, when in fact I'm still out there with them, and I'm quite literally standing right behind Donna Miner. And it's at this moment Donna Miner goofed and made the stupid mistake of assuming that I went into the apartment. So she outright blurted out the fact that the Multnomah County Sheriffs are going to be taking over the surrounding apartments. And my wife's sister, Vicki Rosales, was out there right next to Donna Miner and knew I'm still out there, knows I'm still standing right there. And Vicki Rosales very quickly started speaking over Donna Miner and speaking very quickly to get her to shut the fuck up, and then reminded Donna Miner that I'm still standing there. And Donna Miner very nervously turned and glanced in my direction. And I had enough at that point. I had more than enough information. Way more than enough information at this point to know what the fuck is going on. I already know the Multnomah County Sheriffs use their civilian relatives in sting operations to frame people, and they treat framing and murdering off people like it's a fucking sport. And the Dunham family are relatives to people in the Multnomah County fucking sheriffs. I already knew the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family use doubles and photogenic photos to frame people as pedos. I already knew the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family are goddamn fucking poisoners, and that anybody and everybody that is in law enforcement or is a relative people in law enforcement uses these tactics to frame and murder off people. And I already knew that my wife, Joan Wager, was connected in some way that she was reluctant to discuss with me to Kurt Dunham. I pretty much had the whole situation pegged at this point. The very next morning, I confirmed what Donna Miner blurted out the evening before. Yep, sure, yes indeed, the county sheriffs are indeed taking over the surrounding apartments surrounding my apartment. Because the very next morning, the Multnomah County Sheriffs executed 72-hour notices on all the surrounding apartments surrounding mine. The very next morning. Now, do I have enough information at this point to know when the Multnomah County Sheriffs filled out these 72-hour notices? They filled out the paperwork for these 72-hour notices the same fucking day they told my wife, Joan Wager, to quit her job at the Multnomah County Jail Kitchen to hide and conceal her connections with them. 2 weeks later, I found out, oh gee, my father is being gang stalked by people he believed to be plainclothes people in law enforcement. And I find out, gee, there's some dude in another state where my mother lives that was a look-alike of me, and this dude, along with organized other people, were heavily pressuring my mother into allowing this look-alike of me to move into her home with her. Now, the Multnomah County Sheriffs, it doesn't end there. Because shortly after this, I found out they brought in the Dunham family. They brought in Kurt Dunham and his immediate family. And the Multnomah County Sheriff rented a house for the Dunham family so that they could be a couple blocks away from where I live. And the Dunham family were immediately assigned by the Multnomah County Sheriff to target my children. For all intents and purposes, this sting operation they launched in 2000 is a repeat of everything the Dunhams and the Multnomah County Sheriffs did to me and my family back in the very early 1970s. A fucking repeat. And nobody involved was trying to hide it. If anything, everybody was having fun hinting at it and grinning about it and smirking over it. Right after the Multnomah County Sheriffs took over the surrounding apartments, they told my wife to take me and our kids out of town for a day. And while Joni took me and the kids out of town for a day, that's when the Multnomah County Sheriff broke into my home and they bugged it with video cameras and audio equipment. And from that point forward, the Multnomah County Sheriffs that were surrounding my apartment were on a daily basis directing my wife, Joan Wager, and our oldest daughter, Shauna Wager, to perform for their illegal video surveillance while the county sheriffs arranged to get a double onto my property. Multnomah County Sheriffs paid my wife, Joan Wager, and her sister, Vicki Rosales, to put multiple large swimming pools and a very large trampoline, all of which is costing well over $1,000, within a matter of 2 months onto my property, in preparation for the double's arrival onto my property. In other words, the county sheriffs were paying my wife and her family to turn my yard into a playground in preparation for the double, so that he could perform for their video surveillance and for their photogenic photo. Because they wanted to make me look like a bad guy. They wanted to frame me as a pedo. The whole time, my father was being gang-stalked by plainclothes people in law enforcement. My mother was heavily being targeted by Multnomah County sheriffs and by their civilian operatives, and was being targeted by the double ever since the county sheriffs filled out the 72-hour notices. And the double was pressuring my mother into selling her home to buy a motorhome so that they could drive up to Portland, Oregon to visit me. And while all this is going on, the Dunhams moved into a house a couple blocks away that the Multnomah County Sheriffs rented for them, and they were covertly targeting my children when my children went to school. And they were palling around with my kids, and they were trying to hide it from me. When I kicked this double off my property, after they put the double on my property, that's when all hell broke loose. The Multnomah County Sheriffs ordered that double to batter my mother. My mother lost her motorhome over this incident. She had to literally abandon it to the double because the Portland police didn't give a damn that a double battered my mother. And then 3 weeks later, the Multnomah County Sheriffs poisoned my father, and at the same time, my wife, Joan Wager, poisoned my mother. My mother's 911 call was covered up by the Portland Police and by the Multnomah County Sheriffs. And 3 weeks later, my father was well enough to leave his apartment to come over to my apartment to warn me about what law enforcement did to him. 3 days later, my father was dead.